The wind in Aspen Ridge, Colorado didn't just blow. It whispered. It curled low across the hills, stirring the brittle remnants of last year's leaves, weaving between the cracked pavement and the barren trees. It carried with it a quiet, kind of unrest, like something was about to break loose. This wasn't the kind of place for fresh starts. It was where people came when they'd run out of other options. Cole Hargrove stood at the edge of his training yard, the wood rail cool under his calloused hands. 62 years had carved their mark into his frame. Broad shoulders now slightly hunched, a limp born from old injuries, and eyes that had seen too much. A retired soldier turned dog trainer, Cole had spent his life taming creatures others gave up on. But the one inside the chain-link pen now, this one was different. The dog's name was Max. Thick sable coat like coiled wire, body bristling with tension. His amber eyes never stopped moving, always scanning, calculating. He didn't bark. He watched. He waited. Like something dangerous. That had learned patience. They said Max was a level 3 aggression case, the highest rating before lethal recommendation. He'd bitten 2 officers during transport, shattered a steel muzzle, and nearly tore down a kennel door at the pound. When the town decided he was unfit for adoption, it was Cole, stubborn, alone, and maybe a little desperate, who stepped forward. Not out of pity, not even out of hope. When the mayor had taunted him at the last council meeting, "If the great Cole Hargrove can't train that mutt, maybe he's finally lost his touch," something inside Cole had snapped. Or maybe it had already been broken, and that smug voice had just hit the right nerve. If the dog can sit on command by the spring fair, I'll keep my mouth shut, Mayor Ridgway had said. If not, I get your land. Cole didn't blink. Deal. He hadn't told anyone about the overdue taxes, or the foreclosure notice, or the fact that the pasture behind his house was the last thing he had left. 3 miles away, a yellow car rolled into town. In the back seat, 10-year-old Ella Monroe pressed her forehead against the window, eyes fixed on the blur of pine trees. She hadn't spoken in over a month, not since the fire. Not since her world collapsed in a blaze that took both her parents. Now she lived with her grandmother, Carolyn, a retired teacher doing her best to pretend this was a new beginning. But beginnings don't come easy when you're carrying that kind of loss. Especially when all you have left is a worn backpack, an old stuffed dog, and silence. What none of them knew, not Cole, not Carolyn, not even Ella, was that everything was about to change, and it would all start with a dog no one believed in, and a girl who had nothing left to lose. The next morning, the sky hung low and colorless over Aspen Ridge, hinting at snow, though none had yet fallen. Carolyn Monroe pulled into the gravel lot beside Harrowy Canine Training, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She glanced at her granddaughter, seated silently in the passenger seat. Ella stared straight ahead, lips pressed thin. The stuffed dog she always held still clutched tight in her arms. Cole Hargrove hadn't been expecting visitors that day. He didn't care for them much anymore. But when Dr. Bellamy, the town's vet and one of the few people Cole still respected, called and asked if a grieving child could come sit quietly near the new rescue dog, Cole hadn't said no. He didn't say yes either. He just grunted, and that had been enough. Max was already pacing in his enclosure when they arrived. The dog's muscles twitched beneath his coat like they might explode at any moment. The moment he saw the girl, he froze mid-step, his head tilting ever so slightly. Carolyn started to say something. A warning, maybe, but Cole held up a hand. Let her be. Ella stepped out of the car like she was walking into a dream. Her boots sank into the cold, soft grass as she approached the fence. She didn't speak. Didn't flinch. She simply sat cross-legged just outside the gate's reach, her hands resting in her lap. Max stood still, ears twitching, but made no move to approach. He just watched. From that first day, a pattern formed. Every morning, around the same hour, Carolyn would drive Ella to the station, drop her off with a quiet nod, then return to her part-time job at the library. And every morning, Ella would go to that exact same spot outside Max's enclosure and sit. She never tried to talk to him, never reached out. She didn't bring treats or toys or coaxing words. She just existed, still and present, a silent witness to a dog everyone else had written off. Max, for his part, began to change, slowly, almost imperceptibly. On the second day, he stopped pacing as much. On the third, he circled only twice before lying down, always at the edge of the pen closest to her. His gaze never left her face. Cole noticed everything. He always did. Each day he stood off to the side, arms crossed, his weathered ball cap pulled low. He didn't say much, didn't want to break the spell. But something about the stillness between that girl and the dog was working. Something he couldn't replicate with all the training in the world. "This isn't therapy," he muttered one morning to Dr. Bellamy. "It's babysitting a time bomb." But Bellamy didn't agree. "She's not doing anything," he said. "She's just here. And that dog, he's never been this calm." Cole scoffed, but he didn't stop Ella from coming. In fact, he started making sure the enclosure was clean each morning before she arrived. He didn't know why. Maybe he was just curious. Or maybe he was beginning to hope, though he'd never admit it. By the 6th day, Max began greeting her, not with tail wags or eager barks, just small changes, ears pricked, head tilted. Once he pressed his nose against the chain-link fence, close enough to almost touch her knee. Cole had frozen when he saw it, so had Carolyn, but Ella didn't move. She just sat there still and unafraid. That was the thing about her. She wasn't fearless, far from it, but she wasn't afraid. Max, and Max, for some reason no one could explain, wasn't afraid of her. Cole had spent his life studying canine behavior. He'd trained hundreds of dogs, police canines, rescue dogs, even a few military units. He understood signs of aggression, fear, dominance. But he didn't understand this. This wasn't training. This was something older, quieter, more human. Ella never spoke. Not to Cole, not to Carolyn. But every afternoon she returned to the fence like it was sacred ground. She sat on that same patch of grass, hands folded over her knees, the tattered stuffed dog always by her side. By the 10th day, the entire rhythm of the place had shifted. Max no longer barked when trucks passed on the road. He didn't lunge at the mailman. He ate more, slept better. He still didn't let anyone else near him, not even Cole. But he waited each day for Ella, and she came. Once, when the air smelled like snow, Ella reached into her coat and pulled out a slice of apple. She placed it carefully on the ground, beside her, then slid it just under the fence. Max stared at it for a long time. Then, inch by cautious inch, he crept forward and took it gently from the dirt. Cole had stood frozen, mouth open, a cracked feed bucket still in his hand. "Jesus," he whispered. "She's doing what you can't," Bellamy said from beside him. "She's not forcing him, she's inviting him." That night, Cole sat at his kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee going cold in his hands. The file folder marked Max. Level 3, aggression, lay open before him. The reports inside were bleak, photos of bitten arms, memos from animal control, warnings from state evaluators. But Cole kept thinking about that little girl, bundled, in a too big coat, sitting in the frost with a dog no one else could get near. And how Max, the same dog who nearly tore through steel to escape, had leaned into her silence and softened. He didn't know her story. He didn't need to. Maybe grief. Do grief, maybe somehow that was enough. The winds shifted again over Aspen Ridge. This time they carried something heavier. Not just snow or cold, but a kind of stillness that made the barns creak and the dogs bark less. Spring hadn't arrived yet, but winter was beginning to loosen its grip, just enough to make everything feel fragile. It was on the 12th day that Cole noticed something different. Max wasn't pacing. At first, it seemed like progress. The dog lay curled in a tight circle at the far end of his pen, unmoving, his eyes half closed. But then came the other signs: the untouched food bowl, the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the thick coat slicked with heat instead of frost. "Cole," called Dr. Bellamy without hesitation. "Something's wrong." The vet arrived with his usual calm efficiency, crouching just outside the fence with careful eyes and a gentle voice. He watched Max for nearly 20 minutes before speaking. "He's running a fever. Looks like an infection. Could be something old flaring up." Cole felt a chill creep under his collar. "Can you treat him?" Bellamy frowned. "Not like this. He won't let anyone close. We'd need to sedate him, but even that's risky with how agitated he gets." "He's in pain, Cole. We don't do something soon." He didn't finish the sentence. Inside the house, Cole slammed the fridge door harder than necessary. He wasn't angry at the dog. He was angry at the helplessness, at how things always seemed to fall apart just when hope began to take root. Outside, Max let out a low growl that turned into a whimper, and then a quiet figure appeared at the edge of the paddock. Ella. She wasn't supposed to be there. Carolyn had kept her home that day after hearing Max wasn't well. But somehow, the girl had made her way back, alone, silent, determined. She stood at the fence, unmoving. Her coat was zipped up to her chin, her sleeves too long, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. In her hands, as always, was the scruffy stuffed dog, but something else was tucked under her arm, a worn leather notebook, its corners bent with age. Bellamy stepped forward. She shouldn't be this close, but Max had already lifted his head. The dog didn't growl, didn't bare teeth. He just watched her, ears flicking once, then settling back against his skull. Carolyn came rushing after her moments later, out of breath and panic rising in her voice. "Ella, sweetheart, come back. He's not well." But Ella didn't move. She walked to the same patch of grass she always sat on, folded her legs beneath her, and placed the notebook in her lap. The journal had belonged to her mother, a former animal behaviorist. Pages were filled with notes on dog psychology, training techniques, body language cues, and theories about empathy and emotional mirroring in animals. Ella didn't just read it, she studied it, her small fingers tracing each line as though committing every word to heart. Cole watched from the barn doorway, unsure whether to intervene. Max had returned to lying down, his breathing rough but steady. His gaze never left Ella. Not once. "She's the only one he'll let near," Bellamy said quietly. "This might be our chance." The decision was made. Under the soft yellow glow of the barn lights, Max was sedated, slowly, carefully, while Ella sat just outside the stall, her presence a constant thread holding the dog in place. The wound, hidden beneath a mat of fur and scar tissue on his hind leg, was worse than they feared. An old injury had reopened, the infection spreading fast. Bellamy cleaned it out, flushed the abscess, and applied antibiotics. Max didn't fight. His eyes fluttered once, but there was no struggle. Ella didn't flinch. She stayed right where she was, eyes locked on Max, her fingers clutching the ribbon bookmark in the journal. By the time they finished, Max was asleep, breathing easier, no longer trembling in pain. They moved him to a clean stall, lined with straw, the kind once used for injured colts. Ella followed without being asked, dragging a blanket from the corner and settling herself beside him like a shadow. Carolyn, torn between fear and awe, found an old cot and watched from the sidelines. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the barn, a hush settled. Ella sat still, her mother's notebook open again, flipping through sections on non-verbal cues and trust-building exercises. Occasionally, she'd mimic one, a hand signal, a posture adjustment. Nothing commanding, only offering familiarity. Max stirred once in the night. His eyes opened, dazed, searching, and there she was, not touching him, not speaking, just there. And that was enough. By morning, the fever had broken. The straw beneath him was damp with sweat, but his breathing was even. When Carolyn woke, stiff and aching, she found Ella curled in the straw, using the journal as a pillow. Max's paw, heavy and scarred, just brushed the edge of her coat. And for the first time in weeks, something inside Carolyn eased. She hadn't known what to do with her granddaughter. No books or counselors or kind-hearted neighbors had been able to bring Ella back. But this dog, this broken, dangerous animal, had anchored her, held her steady. Maybe, Carolyn thought, this wasn't about training at all. Maybe it was about grief, finding grief. Two wounded souls, each reflecting something the other recognized. The town didn't know this part of the story. Not yet. What they did see were the photos. Someone, no one knew who, had taken a picture of Ella kneeling beside the fence, Max only inches away. It landed on the mayor's desk within days, and where some saw healing, Ridgway saw a liability. The whisper campaign started quietly. Is it safe to let a child near that dog? Shouldn't there be more supervision? Who even gave permission for this? But inside the barn, far from politics and petty agendas, something else was happening. Ella had begun to hum, just faintly, a broken, quiet sound that barely reached past her lips. A melody without words. Max's ears twitched at the noise. He lifted his head slightly, eyes half-lidded. Then he let out a deep rumbling sigh, the sound of release, of trust hard-earned. Cole stood at the threshold, one hand braced against the door frame, and knew the truth of what he was seeing. He hadn't saved this dog. And Ella, maybe she wasn't there to be saved either. Maybe they were saving each other. But outside the barn, the pressure was building. Mayor Ridgway wasn't one to let things unfold without interference. The moment whispers reached his office about Ella and Max, about a girl who barely spoke taming a dog labeled too dangerous to live, he saw risk. And risk to a man like Ridgway was something to be eliminated or weaponized. He called an emergency council meeting. Quiet, under the guise of procedural review. His tone was measured, but his words were sharp. "What message are we sending?" he asked. "When we allow a traumatized child to interact with an animal this town already deemed a public threat?" No one had answers, not yet. Back at the ranch, Cole received a warning from a city official. One more incident, even a hint of impropriety, and the entire training facility could be shut down. He said nothing. But that evening, he reinforced the fencing, locked up the old record books, and left a thermos of hot tea on the barn shelf for Ella. That night, she returned again. Max was stronger now. He lifted his head when she arrived, and this time his tail thumped once against the straw. Outside, the wind carried rumors. Inside, healing carried on, silent, stubborn, and undeniable. Trust, it turned out, didn't arrive with a command or a treat. It wasn't built through dominance or submission. It came quietly, like snow melting under sun, slow and almost imperceptible, until suddenly, everything was different. In the weeks following Max's recovery, the barn became something else. Not just a place of rehabilitation, but a sanctuary. For him, for Ella, even for Cole. Though he'd never admit it, Ella kept coming. Each afternoon after school, she arrived with her sleeves pulled down over her hands, her mother's notebook tucked under one arm, and a small container of carrot slices, her chosen training tool. It was something her mother had believed in, that anxious dogs responded better to low-scent, low-stimulus rewards. Liver treats excited, carrots grounded. Max took to them instantly, not like other dogs, eager or ravenous. He accepted them gently, like he knew what they meant. They began with eye contact. Ella would sit in the paddock, the gate closed but unlatched, her back straight and calm. She didn't speak, didn't gesture wildly or demand anything. She simply looked at him. And over. Max began to look back, not just glance, hold. For seconds, then longer. Then came hand signals. A flat palm for stay. A low sweep for come. A finger to the ground for lie down. Max didn't get it at first, but he didn't walk away either. He stayed. And with each session, something grew between them. A thread pulled tighter, stronger. Cole watched all of it. Most days he stood with one foot on the lower fence rail, arms folded across his chest, face unreadable. But inside, everything was shifting. All his years of training, the structured programs, the repetition, the rules, none of it had reached Max. But this girl, who barely spoke and never forced, had broken through. One afternoon, Cole turned to Dr. Bellamy, who had stopped by, to check on Max. "She's not training him," Cole said quietly. Bellamy nodded. "No, she's reminding him." "Of what?" Bellamy gave a half smile. "That he's still a dog, still good. It wasn't just Max who changed. Ella did too. Her posture grew more confident, her eyes steadier. Though she still didn't speak much, her silence no longer felt hollow. It felt full, like music, with no words, a presence rather than an absence. The town started to notice. At first, it was just whispers. A few kids from school had seen Ella walking into the paddock unaccompanied, and word spread fast. Then came the parents, concerned, skeptical, some even angry. "He's still dangerous," they said. "What if he snaps?" "Who's watching her?" Cole fielded the calls. Most he ignored. Some he answered gruffly. But the pressure was rising, and Ridgway, never one to miss an opportunity, stoked it with subtle precision. Photos resurfaced. Ones of Ella kneeling beside the fence, Max just inches away. They were emailed to regional news outlets, tagged with headlines like "Aggressive Dog Still Uncontained" and "Trainer Gambles Child Safety on Unproven Program." But then something shifted. Emma Walsh, a student in Ella's class, had been watching from afar. She was quiet too, in her own way. The kind of kid who noticed things others missed. One afternoon, without saying a word, Emma sat down beside Ella in the grass outside Max's enclosure. She didn't speak, just sat. The next day, she brought her sketch pad. She drew Max, then Ella, then the space between them. A week later, her mother, Dana Walsh, a columnist for the Auburn Sentinel, came by the ranch. She wasn't expecting much, but what she saw changed her. She saw Max, once called untrainable, following Ella through a silent sequence of movements, weaving through cones, pausing at commands only given by glance or gesture. She saw Ella, focused and sure, her face, lit not with performance but presence. Dana didn't write an exposé, she wrote a story. It ran front page. What trust looks like, a girl, a dog, and the language between them. It caught fire. For the first time, the narrative wasn't about danger. It was about healing, about a second chance. The town, cautious but curious, began to watch with different eyes. But Ridgway wasn't finished. At a city council meeting, he tried to invoke emergency measures to shutter the training facility on grounds of public risk. He cited outdated regulations, cherry-picked vet reports, even hinted at child welfare concerns. But the vote stalled. Dana's column had done something even Ridgway hadn't expected. It galvanized the community. People started showing up at the ranch, not to protest, to volunteer. An old farmer who'd lost his dog to bad handling offered to build new fencing. A retired teacher offered to donate books. A college student home for spring break offered to film the sessions for documentation. And Cole? He didn't fight it. He let them help. He cleared more space in the paddock, reinforced the gates, set up cameras, not for proof but for protection. And then he handed Ella a small plastic whistle. "It's not for commands," he told her. "It's for emergencies. You wear it. You don't need to use it, but I want you to have it." She nodded. She never used it. That Friday, the air was warmer than usual, the kind of afternoon that held its breath, the wind suspended. The sun stretched long across the hills. Ella stood at the far end of the paddock. Max sat across from her. No leash, no collar, just space. She raised her hand, palm open, slow and steady. Max stood. She turned, her steps deliberate. Max followed. They moved together, not like trainer and dog, but like two parts of the same rhythm. At one point she paused. Max sat. She stepped back. Max waited. Cole stepped forward, heart hammering in his chest. He crouched beside Max, extended a hand. Fingers loose, palm down. Max sniffed, then leaned in. For the first time, Cole rested. A hand on Max's head. No growl, no tension, just contact. When he pulled back, Ella looked up at him. Just a glance, but filled with quiet understanding. That night, Cole didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, an untouched book in his lap. The wind whispered through the eaves, and he heard his late wife's voice again, soft and certain. Some dogs don't need control. They need understanding. He'd argued with her back then, believed in rules, structure, commands. But now he wasn't so sure. Out back, Max lay by the fence, eyes on the horizon. Ella's whistle hung around her neck, still unused. In the quiet, they needed nothing else. Just presence. And presence, it seemed, was everything. Dewey Body, Part 4. The spring fair, the 1st of May, arrived with a warmth that felt almost out of place. After months of gray skies and bitter wind, Auburn Ridge breathed again. The tulips along Main Street unfurled like tiny flames. Flags snapped. In the breeze, vendors lined the sidewalks, and the scent of kettle corn mingled with sawdust and freshly turned soil. But this year, the town's spring fair carried a different weight. It wasn't just a celebration of the season's return. It was a reckoning. People weren't just coming for funnel cakes and music. They came to see a dog and a girl, and a bond that had quietly redefined what healing could look like. Behind the community center, where the rodeo ring had been hastily cleared and leveled, rows of folding chairs filled quickly. Children squirmed in their seats. Teachers, farmers, and retirees leaned forward, eyes narrowed with a kind of collective anticipation. No one knew exactly what to expect, but everyone knew they didn't want to miss it. Cole stood just beyond the gate, arms crossed, his face unreadable, but his shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched, not with fear, but with something deeper. Reverence, maybe. Or quiet awe. Beside him, Ella waited. She wore a navy vest 2 sizes too big, her long hair braided neatly down her back. Around her neck hung the whistle Cole had given her, still unused. She hadn't needed it. Not once. When the loudspeaker crackled to life, Principal Avery's voice carried over the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, this next demonstration isn't a performance. There will be no tricks, no theatrics. What you're about to see is the result of patience, presence, and the quiet kind of courage most of us overlook. The gate opened. Max entered the ring without a leash. His coat caught the light, black and gold and scarred. His posture was alert but calm, his ears forward, tail low but not tucked. He paused at the center, glanced once at the crowd, then turned his eyes toward Ella. She stepped forward, hand raised, palm open. Max sat. A hush fell over the crowd, not because the command had been impressive, but because it hadn't been one at all. It was simple, effortless, earned. Ella moved through the ring with deliberate grace. She made no sound, just hand signals, subtle and smooth. A sweep of her fingers, and Max turned. A pivot of her foot, and he followed. At one point, she stopped beside a cone and waited. Max paused, then at the slightest nod, leapt over a small beam and landed with a softness that made a woman in the front row gasp. He weaved through the markers. He paused at the edge. He lay down with his head on her boots. Each movement wasn't just obedience, it was partnership. The crowd, once murmuring, was silent now. Even the children stopped fidgeting. They weren't watching a routine. They were witnessing a relationship. Near the front, Mayor Ridgway sat stiffly, his eyes hard. His earlier efforts to remove the event from the program had failed, and Dana Walsh's scathing editorial hadn't helped. "The dog that healed a town," her headline had read. Underneath, a full recounting of how the mayor had attempted to shut down a story that clearly needed to be told. Now, he watched it unfold with no escape. When Ella completed the last cue, she turned to Max. He tilted his head, then walked to her side and sat again, close but not leaning. The kind of closeness that spoke of trust, not training. The crowd didn't erupt. They rose, applause spread like a slow wave. Not wild, but deep, respectful. A kind of standing ovation reserved not for showmanship, but for truth. Carolyn stood to the side, her hand pressed to her heart. Her cheeks were wet. Dr. Bellamy next to her let out a low whistle and shook his head with a smile. Cole stepped forward, nudged Ella gently toward the mic. She hesitated. He crouched, whispered something in her ear. She nodded. Then she turned to face the crowd. A sea of expectant faces stared back. Farmers in flannel, teachers with notebooks, mothers clutching their kids' hands. All of them waiting. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked at Max and found her voice. "I didn't save Max," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He saved me. I just listened. That was all. No grand speech, no rehearsed statement, and yet in the stillness that followed, it landed like thunder. Later that afternoon, while folk songs played in the square and kids chased bubbles through chalked alleys, Cole stood on a makeshift stage beside the general store. A microphone crackled in his hand. He was never much for public speaking, but today felt different. "I've spent a lifetime training dogs," he began. "Some by discipline, some by routine. But this, what Ella showed us, that wasn't training." He paused, glanced toward the paddock in the distance where Max lay curled in the shade. That was understanding. He cleared his throat. "We're going to keep the station open. But starting next month, we're expanding. A new branch, a new way." He nodded toward Ella. "We're calling it Ella's Way." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "It's not about commands," he continued. "Not about control. It's about presence. About giving scared animals, and sometimes scared people, the space to remember who they were before fear rewrote them." No one objected. Not that day. Carolyn made her decision too. She wouldn't return to the city. She'd found a small cabin near the edge of town, close enough that Ella could walk to the station each afternoon. It wasn't the life she planned. But maybe, in this quiet valley, they could build something better. As for Max, he became something else entirely. Not the cautionary tale he'd once been. Not the liability stamped in red ink on shelter documents, but a symbol. The dog who didn't break under fear, who didn't lash out in pain, who waited, who listened, who learned to trust again because one girl showed up every day and sat without asking anything in return. In the following weeks, Ella's Way welcomed its first group. 4 dogs, 3 kids, 2 retired handlers, and Max was there for each session. He didn't lead, he didn't perform. He just lay nearby, breathing easy. That was enough. And if you passed by the station on a summer evening, you might find Cole, leaning on the fence, thermos of coffee in hand, watching the girl and the dog move through the grass like echoes of something older than memory. He didn't give commands anymore. He just listened. And that, finally, was enough. Spring deepened into early summer, and Aspen Ridge settled into a slower rhythm. The frost gave way to soft soil. Grass grew thick beneath the paddock fences. Wildflowers threaded through the gravel edges of the old training yard. And for the first time in years, laughter drifted from the barn. Ella's Way was no longer an idea. It was a heartbeat. 3 afternoons a week, the gate swung open to a small, strange family of kids and dogs, each one carrying a story, too heavy for their age or too painful to be told aloud. Some had speech delays, some flinched at loud noises, others simply withdrew. But they came, they watched, they sat, just like Ella once had. Max didn't perform. He didn't obey on cue or demonstrate tricks, but he was always there, sitting quietly in the grass, breathing steadily, letting his calm fill the space that once belonged to panic. And Ella, she had started speaking more, not often, not loudly, but clearly. When another girl cried the first time a dog barked too close, it was Ella who reached over, handed her a slice of carrot and said, "Just wait. He's not ready yet." Cole watched it all unfold from the porch most days, arms crossed, face still lined with skepticism. But his eyes had softened. His steps were slower now, more thoughtful. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to the town, not to the mayor, not even to himself. But peace, he'd learned, was never permanent. 2 weeks after the fair, a letter arrived, stamped from Denver. Official, unforgiving, a legal notice from the State Animal Regulation Board. A complaint had been filed, citing improper housing standards, unauthorized therapy programming, minor exposure to high-risk animals. The investigation would begin in 30 days. It didn't say who filed it, but it didn't need to. Cole folded the letter once, placed it in the drawer beside the weathered training logs, and stared out at the barn, where Ella sat with Max. Her legs folded beneath her, journal open on her lap. He exhaled slowly. "We're not done," he muttered. "Not even close." That night, Carolyn found a folded scrap of paper tucked inside her mail. No name. Just a message, typed in neat block letters. B. "Careful who you trust, there's more coming." She held it in trembling fingers, glanced toward the barn light glowing faintly through the trees, and understood. The miracle had drawn attention, but so had the power behind it. And power, even in quiet hands, makes enemies. Still, something had shifted in Auburn Ridge, in its people, in its bones. Because when one girl sat beside a dog everyone had given up on, and waited, it didn't just change him. It changed them all. And now the real test was coming. To be continued.